The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is actually the second day, although it's the first day of teisho, of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate, the second and two in a row in April 2022. Yesterday there was no teisho because we were doing something very special. Every year in this, well, except for COVID, a couple of COVID years, every year there's a group of men whose heritage stretches all the way back into 15th century Spain. It's something of a lay order for men. It's called the Brotherhood of Penitents. They're known as the Hermanos here in northern New Mexico. And every year on this Monday after Palm Sunday, they do a pilgrimage walk from the church in Truchas, which is about 6 miles away from us, the next village over, down to a place known as Santuario, the sanctuary. The sanctuary, Santuario, was originally part of a hacienda. A wealthy Spanish person had received a grant of land from the King of Spain at the time and come and settled in that part of northern New Mexico, and being a devout Roman Catholic, established his own private chapel. Over the years, this was used, and eventually there's no trace of the hacienda anymore, but the church that is there, the Santuario, is known for being a place of healing. And prior to even the Spanish coming to New Mexico, it was known as a place of deep peace and healing through the Native American groups that live in the area. And so now it belongs to the Catholic Church. The Hermanos had a checkered history with the church. There was a time in New Mexico where there's about a 20-year, if I remember right, gap in the church sending priests to New Mexico. These days, any Catholic priests that come to New Mexico are sent by the Spanish Catholic Church. But there was about a 20-year gap, and during that time, people died, people were born, people got sick, people got married, and there were no priests to officiate. And this lay group of men who are devout, humble, compassionate, deeply supportive human beings, and I believe they take vows that help move them in that direction. But regardless of how they get there, they are quite wonderful human beings, very supportive, very caring. They do things without expecting any reward, any thank you even, for people who need help. We've had a number of different experiences here at Mountain Gate of their generosity and their humility and their compassion. But every year they do this pilgrimage, this walking pilgrimage, about eight or so miles long, down the mountain to Santuario, and it culminates in a Catholic Mass. Before COVID, I did it a couple of years in a row, and it was such a phenomenal spiritual experience that I was very happy when they decided to do it again this year. I miscalculated. I thought it was going to be the Monday that was the free day after sesshin, but as it turns out, it was a Monday earlier than that. And because it can be extremely helpful in our Zen practice to suddenly have something different, And so we did it yesterday, a long trek down to Santuario with the hermanos and anyone who could join in, both in English and in Spanish, mostly in Spanish. There was one go round in a section of the rosary that was done in English, I think for the benefit of those of us who were not Spanish heritage folks who were walking along with them. Everyone here in sesshin, in the Zendo, did the walk. And of course, we're quite sore today, quite achy from that long walk. However, my sense of it is that we all had a deeply spiritual experience as a result of walking that walk with these very deeply spiritual neighbors of ours. This is a time for that. It's not just Lent. It's not just Holy Week. It's also Ramadan in the Islamic religion, a time also of fasting and penance and support of those who need support. It's also very close to Passover. Passover will come in a couple of days in the Jewish tradition. And in Buddhism also, it is the time of the birth of the Buddha. I don't know as much about other religions, but just the fact that spring is here now, an uplifting of spirit as the light grows and people are able to get warmer and get out in the flowers and trees that are beginning to bloom. It is a very unique time of year. The opposite in the way of fall, where things are closing down, hunkering down for the winter. And it's been this way since history was first chronicled, really. That spring was a time of uplift. And it's also a time to renew the commitment to our practice. What is our practice? Our practice is about becoming so profoundly aware, deep within, that something called enlightenment ensues. And of course, as part of this long process, something called the long maturation by Torei Enji, the Hakuin's first and foremost Dharma successor, who found himself drawn to the Buddhist monkhood at the age of 8 and continued through into his 70s, despite the fact that he got quite ill when he was early to mid 20s. And that's where he gave us a lesson in adaptation, in flexibility. And this also is part of why we went on the pilgrimage yesterday, because I remembered that many years ago, when some of us were sent out to Santa Fe to build what was going to be Roshi Kapleau's dream of his later years, to have a country retreat place where he would work with a handful of senior students. It ended up not coming to fruition, but most of us did not go back. And so Roshi would come out in the summertime and give sesshin at a rented Buddhist temple, Buddhist center across in the Hemis Mountains. Bodhi Mandala, it was called then. It's now called Bodhi Manda. I'm not quite sure why they changed the name, but as those of you who know Rochester Zen Center training, particularly with sesshin, know things are pretty standard. And I wouldn't even say pretty. They are. There's a standard format for sesshin protocol, for sesshin, the daily sittings, the schedule. There's no speaking except in Doksan, and so on and so forth. And when Roshi was giving sesshin out here in New Mexico, first of all, Bodhi was not ever established as a Buddhist center. It was established as a Christian monastery. And eventually the monks left and sold the place, and a group of people training under a Japanese Buddhist teacher bought it and started having sesshin there. But it also has hot springs, and they supported the place by renting out rooms to people who wanted to enjoy the hot springs up in the mountains. But it was nothing at all like what we experienced in Rochester. First of all, among other things, it was done during the rainy season in New Mexico, which was rather short and quite intense. And it's in a narrow canyon over there in the Jemez Mountains, across the river from where we are. There's probably 80 miles as the crow flies. And so every afternoon, the storms would come raging up the canyon with great intensity. The forceful rain flying horizontally and carrying a lot of insects and other critters, and loud thunder and wind to the point where it was simply impossible to hold sesshin the way it was held in Rochester, which was more of a gentrified version. And on top of that, there were June bugs that were extremely plentiful, and they would crawl into our bedding and fly around at night. And there were a lot of things happening. And then there's the famous story that some of you have heard before. One person who was the outdoor work supervisor had tasked a group of men to do weeding around the pool. It's just a natural pool that was the hot spring. And that at that moment, the Bodhi women who, the Bodhi residents always stayed there when we were having our sesshin. And the Bodhi women decided to come down and soak. So they came down and stripped naked and plopped in the water. Interestingly enough, one of the people that was in that work party actually had a kensho that day. So there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that was the same as in Rochester. And not only was there nothing as it was in Rochester, there was nothing the same day to day, except an attempt to hold the same schedule. And so the interesting thing was that quite a few people began to have kensho experiences. These were people who had spent many years doing many sesshin in Rochester and hadn't yet had a kensho experience. And suddenly, not quite left and right, but close to it, people were beginning to break through to a deeper level of awareness. And that is what kensho is. It's a deeper level of awareness that allows us to see more clearly our own behavior and the nature of reality. It is not by any means a final step. And that's something very important for people to recognize. There is a book, a collection of teachings of Kala Rinpoche called a Flash of Lightning in the Dark Night. The idea being that you're struggling up a mountain path in pitch black darkness, feeling your way along. This is Zazen prior to Kensho. And then suddenly there's a flash of lightning, and for a few hundred feet, maybe maybe less than that, you can suddenly see the path. And now you have a better idea of where you're going and where you need to go. But that's just a flash. And you still have to walk it. And eventually, as you continue this process, dawn begins to come. You begin to see more and more clearly where you're caught. And the thing is, we cannot become free without experiencing where we are caught. That's something that's become very clear over the decades of my practice. It's not something we choose up front to do, but it's an essential part of practice. We have to walk into that anxiety or that fear or see fully and feel fully that feeling of remorse, that when we recognize that we have spoken harshly to somebody or done something that we tried to pretend didn't happen. All of this, it's about opening to the whole catastrophe. Except that once we begin to open to it and work with it, sit with it, feel our way into a greater depth through it, own it, choose not to behave in those negative ways, our mind is allowed a greater opening. And within that, greater freedom. Zen practice, if we do it long enough and with commitment and attention and awareness, will liberate us. There is no question about it. Those of us who have been practicing for many decades, seriously, deeply, know that personally. And as far as I know, we're all also committed to continuing that deepening, continuing that opening, working towards fully expressing our innate compassion and wisdom as these hermanos that we walked down the mountain with did and do. Practice demands attention and awareness. Most of us, in fact, pretty much all of us in this modern day of digital complexity, all kinds of images coming at us through the television, through our tablets, through our computers, through our cell phones, through our watches even now. Dick Tracy has come to the fore. You can even talk to your watch, and it can even respond. There's so much to draw us out of this inner search, this inner presence that is essential to living fully. And Zen practice really is about increasingly developing that presence. It's not just about solving koans. It's not just about looking really good, sitting in perfect posture on the cushion. It's about the deep, ongoing inner work that we are all called to do if we are going to practice Zen meditation. We can train our mind to be flexible, to roll with the punches, to open to new experiences, to deal with challenging emotions, to live a life of openness, beauty, compassion, wisdom, and joy. And yes, there may be pain and suffering there too, but it will not be received in the same way, and it will not be felt in the same way if we are not caught in certain ideas about ourselves. So the practice is paying attention, such profound attention, that we become increasingly aware of where we are caught. And in that actual awareness, to let it go. We don't make it go. There are plenty of attempts we've had since early childhood, trying not to feel bad, trying not to be greedy, trying not to, but it just doesn't work that way. We need an additional set of tools, and those tools are available for us through Zen practice. The extended out breath, done properly, simply letting ourselves breathe out with focus on the experience in the body. And then when the breath gets far enough out that we're about to pull it back in again, instead we push it a little further out. And that requires a focus. And ironically, it also allows an expanded awareness. And the more we can stay in that presence of focus and expanded awareness, the deeper we will be able to go, and the more freedom we will eventually experience. And again, don't assume that you do the out breath and there's an immediate experience of bliss or any experience of bliss. There is when you reach a point where you're between thoughts. They're so present that you're between thoughts that there is a sense of I can't really describe it. It's a sense of freedom. It's a sense of profound presence arises. And before that, often, and within that sometimes, there is a hit of anxiety because we are so accustomed to what Roshi Kapleau used to call thoughting, the distraction from being present that is afforded by our modern society, that to have a moment when there is nothing happening in our mind can feel scary. But if we tune in at the same time to that anxiety, it's amazing the freedom that can bring forth. It's built in. Everybody has that capacity so long as they're willing to do the work to focus increasingly deeply. And it's not about thinking a focus. It's about feeling a focus. It's about becoming a focus, becoming a presence. There's a neuroscientist named Rick Hansen who's written a couple of different books on this, and I would recommend them to you. I don't recall the exact titles at the moment. Buddha Brain, I think, is one of them, but he's gone beyond that. Hardwiring Happiness, I believe, is another one. And there are others. I think he's done about 3 or 4 books, but he's worth paying attention to. He happens to be a practicing Buddhist, so he knows what he's talking about in terms of focus and awareness. But he also knows from a neurological standpoint as well. So if you're puzzled about how to go about this, pick up some of those books and give them a read. The main thing is this: focus, awareness, presence is the road to freedom from suffering. It doesn't mean that difficult, painful situations won't arise in our life, but we'll be able to receive them differently. Suffering is a choice in how to respond to pain or difficulty. We can make that choice in the positive direction, in which case the pain and difficulty actually will seem to shrink in importance. Presence is the key. And that's been known for centuries. So I leave you with that today. And I'd go for it. Knowing that it's a long path. It's not instantaneous. But the more you can stay present, and the more you can stay more deeply present, the more open and free your life will begin to become. So long as you have a willingness to open to the whole shebang, not just the nice parts, but all the parts. And this is the best season for doing this. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.